I've been reporting how a global governance system, the biblically prophesied order, is forming right before our eyes. What I haven't reported on is why superpowers like the USA, Europe, Russia, China are all going along with this and even facilitating it. Why would these powerful nations surrender their own power and supremacy to somebody else? It doesn't make any sense, does it? This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and the Bible explains who the order will be, how it forms, and even why the superpowers of the world will promote it and promote its creation. What's in it for them? We'll go over all of that in today's video. So when you see the Pact for the Future signed on October 2nd, remember this teaching. And this teaching was inspired by a question from a member of our community, Jah Jephthah. Here's what he asked. Hey Nelson, as always, thank you for being a watchman in these crazy times. I have followed your YouTube channel for some years, and you have spoken a lot about the summit for the future that's coming, that they will make a covenant, and that all the nations will come together and sign a certain covenant, maybe even start the last week. I'm wondering, for a while, as far as I understand it, the nations are giving up their sovereignty and authority and handing it over to the UN. I wonder why. Why would the nations do that? And to what extent have they already done this in the whole agenda for the Great Reset? Why would they sign such a thing? I don't really understand why nations in a fairly powerful position would sign this. And I figure if Jah has this question, then you probably do as well. Why does something so totally illogical happen? Why do the powerful surrender their power? When something doesn't make sense, there is a reason behind the scenes, something they aren't letting us see. For instance, consider the USA's two presidential candidates. Two giant issues on the international stage loom on the horizon for the USA, but didn't address either one of them. The first, of course, is the United Nations Pact for the Future, which they expect to be signed just October 2nd. It was just weeks away from the debate. This pact will give the UN almost unlimited power over the nations, as we reported before. This pact will dilute the Security Council by adding many new members and will limit the ability for any one nation to veto. Plus, it will empower the World Court within our own national boundaries. These are incredible, power-grabbing moves. Why hasn't either candidate ever addressed this issue? Why didn't they address the issue of the World Health Organization and their recent proposed treaty? Again, neither of these massive global power grabs has ever been mentioned by either candidate. Why? Think about that for a moment. Why wouldn't candidates mention this? If the USA stands to lose power that is granted to it by its own constitution, why wouldn't they mention this? Why wouldn't presidential candidates even bring it up? Why wouldn't the mainstream media discuss this? These are questions that should make you go, huh? It makes no logical sense unless someone is behind the scenes and preventing this from being discussed. And it's no different with China or Russia or the European Union. None of the leaders of the world are talking negatively about the upcoming conference. It's radio silence across the nations of the world. Where is the pushback against these initiatives, or at least a debate about them? Fortunately, the Bible's not afraid to bring these topics up. In what is one of the longest running prophecies in the Bible, in Revelation 17 and 18, one of the angels who stands before God explains this coming global governance system to the Apostle John. There are four main characters in this 2-chapter prophecy: the kings of the earth, who are the politicians, the Antichrist or the beast, and his 10 kings. We consider that like one character. The merchants of the world, who are the billionaires and corporations, and then someone known as the prostitute or harlot. Those are the four main characters. They interact in a very complex way. This is what we see happening right now before our eyes. Let's describe the interaction. Let's see how these characters work with each other. The prostitute or harlot is at the center. It is the global governance system. It is not a government itself. It's a system. But it controls all the governments. Notice the kings of the earth, the politicians, still exist. So let's read about it in Revelation 17:18. And there we learn that the prostitute reigns over the kings of the earth. So if you have thought the prostitute is the USA or Rome or Islam or the Catholic Church or Jerusalem or any other visible world government or city, you're mistaken. None of these rule over the kings of the earth. In Revelation 17:15, we learn this system sits on or controls the nations, peoples, tribes, and languages. Doesn't rule over them. It sits on them. In Revelation 17:2, the system sits on the beast in the same way. It controls him, at least at first. So the prostitute is a system that controls the world, a hidden, invisible system, at least at this point. The Bible calls this system Mystery Babylon or Mystery Babel. In Hebrew, the word for Babel and Babylon are really the same word. And just as Babel was a world governance system back then, built the Tower of Babel, so is the prostitute. But who's in charge of the prostitute? Not politicians, it rules over them, but merchants. Look what it says in Revelation 18:23 through 24. For your merchants were the great ones of the earth. And great ones here means commanders, because all nations were deceived by your sorcery. The Greek word here is pharmakeia. We'll discuss that in a moment. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of saints and of all who have been slain on the earth. So the merchants, the billionaires, the corporations and the central banks, they're calling the shots. They are in charge of the politicians and have been for some time. Trump, Harris, Putin, they aren't in charge. The merchants are in charge. So although we think the politicians serve the people or even themselves or their countries, they're actually serving the merchants. How this happens is described in the very first verses of this prophecy in Revelation 17:1 through 2. Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute, and that's the world system, who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers of the earth have become drunk. Back in ancient days, they had a yearly ceremony known as Hieros Gamos, or holy marriage. We've talked about this on the channel before, where the kings of the region had illicit relations with a temple prostitute who represented the goddess of the region. And these goddesses and gods back in the ancient days, we got to remember these were actual beings, fallen angels. So they were representing a fallen angel. And by this act, the king pledged his allegiance to that goddess. And the goddess gave him the right to rule. And in our naturalistic world, we always forget these gods and goddesses were actual beings. And it's not different today. Our struggles are not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in the heavenly places. So this tells us what kind of prostitute the harlot actually is. She is a temple prostitute, performing this function on behalf of the fallen angels. She grants politicians the right to rule. And how does she do that? By giving them money to fund their campaigns and controls them with bribes. And as a result, they pledge to obey the prostitute, not their country, not the people who vote for them. No matter what political party, They are owned by the system. Want proof? Here's a short clip from one of the executives of BlackRock, who controls, only a third of the corporate capital on the whole world, a third of the money. Listen to what he said.
Let me tell you, it's not through who's the president. It's who's controlling the wallet. So it's the,
And who's that?
the hedge funds, BlackRock, the banks. These guys want campaign financing. Yep, you can buy your candidates.
How so?
All of these financial institutions, they buy politicians. First, there's the senators, and these guys are cheap. You got 10 grand, you can buy a senator. It doesn't matter who wins.
You're still gonna...
They're in my pocket at this point. I can give you $500K right now, no questions asked.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do what needs to be done. They're like, yeah, of course.
And
why not?
does everybody do that? Does BlackRock do that?
This system is the same. Whether it's the USA, Europe, Russia, China, all of them are controlled by the system of this world and its money. The people of the world are drunk on the wine of this system. They believe these nations are calling the shots on their own, while they're not. If you need further proof, consider the pandemic and how all nations went into lockdown without so much as a debate or a discussion. All the nations bowed down to the system. Someone behind the scenes commanded the lockdown, and all the nations complied. So, Ja, the first part of my answer to you is why the nations would willingly surrender their sovereignty to the system is that leaders of the countries aren't doing it in the best interest of their people or their countries. Even though mainstream media presents it that way, the leaders are actually working for the system for the most part. The hidden hand behind the scenes doesn't want you to know they're the ones calling the shots. Now, you may have seen this graphic before. It's our pyramid of world power, our view of how the world is organized. At the very top are the fallen angels. Below them are the merchants, the central bankers, and the corporate leaders, whom the fallen angels support. And they have been given great financial wealth in order to influence the lower levels. We have the government systems like the UN and the World Health Organization at the next level that govern many nations. And below them are the politicians who are in control of the nations, and then they use things like the deep state to enforce their policies. Your next question was, hasn't this been going on for quite a while? And the answer is yes. There have been milestones, however, in the development of the system. The murder of the U.S. President John F. Kennedy is one in the USA. Another major milestone was the pandemic. If you notice, the passage from Revelation 18 that we read about the merchants indicates they became the commanders of the earth because of something known as pharmakeia, whose primary definition is medicine or drugs, or sorcery involving medicine or drugs. All of us experience that. All of us know the world hasn't been the same since that pandemic. We know the top 10 richest men on earth doubled their wealth during that period, from $700 billion to $1.5 trillion, while the middle and lower classes, at the same time, dropped in net worth by $1.3 trillion. It was a massive wealth transfer, almost one for one, from the poor to the rich. Although we can't see behind the scenes, I also imagine a similar increase in power of these characters happened as well at that same time. So yes, this has been gradually building for a while, but why does the system need then this pact for the future if they're already in charge? And that's part of your question as well. My thinking is because they influence the world, but they don't really control every aspect of it. And that is what I think these billionaires and bankers are really after, complete domination and control. For instance, the WHO has tried to get a treaty signed now for 2 years, and they've been unable to do it. Another example is the dividing of Israel. They've been using the USA and Saudi Arabia to try to do this for years now. But the two sides that are really negotiating have been opposing the agreement that the elites have drafted. So it's hard to control all 193 nations of the UN at the same time. It's a lot easier to tell them what to do and not have to deal with rogue leaders and countries. Thus, the pact for the future is on the table. One covenant to control all of them, and then by extension, all of us. That's what makes this covenant the greatest secular covenant in the history of the world. Never before has there been a single covenant that controls every nation on earth. Once they have that power, they will then be able to get all these other issues that they desire done. Climate change, the World Health Organization treaty, the division of Israel, laws to promote LGBTQ+, digital world currency, etc., etc. Once they have the pact, they should be able to enforce all these other things. Now, these things are universally desired by the elite of the world, but not universally desired by all the nations, and certainly not all the people. Sure, the elite have placed their people in charge of the superpowers. They are invested in making the elite's dreams come true, and the elite have really invested heavily in them. But the leaders of second-tier nations are not as bought in and sold to the elite dream. Certainly, they aren't getting the same money and support that the leaders of the superpowers are. There's only so much money to go around, it seems. Also, the woke culture that the elite support in order to break down society is an anathema to many outside their sphere, their world. Enter the beast and the 10 kings. We know initially that Mystery Babylon rules over all the kings and sits on the beast and steers him. However, that only lasts so long. Eventually, the beast and the 10 kings revolt, as we see in Revelation 17, 16 through 17. So how do the 10 horns and the beast end up defeating a world governance system? Who are these 10 horns? Click right here to keep watching and discover who the Bible tells us they likely are and how they find the power to defeat the world governance system. This is Nelson, and I'll see you there.